Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are diving into something really fundamental to who we are, something we rely on all the time, our memory.
Yeah, absolutely core.
And, we tend to picture it like a perfect playback device, don't we?
Right.
Like hitting record on a video camera, and you can just rewind and see exactly what happened.
It's such a common idea, right?
Yeah.
But when you actually look at the research, the picture is, well, it's much more fascinating and honestly a little unsettling.
Well,
Our sources, they consistently show that memory isn't that perfect recording. It's definitely not a verbatim record. Think of it less like a fixed photograph.
okay.
And more like something that's kind of chameleon-like, always shifting, adapting. It's a reconstructive process.
Reconstructive.
Meaning we essentially rebuild memories each time we access them. And that whole process, it's inherently fragile and error-prone.
Wow, okay, so it's not like pulling up a save file. It's more like creating it again each time.
Exactly. Which is why our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack what these sources are telling us. We've got psychological studies, legal guides, even philosophical takes.
Right.
All looking at this surprisingly bendy nature of memory. We want to understand just how easily it can get distorted or even, nudge us into remembering things that didn't quite happen like that.
And the implications, especially in areas like the justice system, that sounds huge.
Huge. And we'll also dig into what this malleability means for us personally, our sense of self, who we think we are, this idea of authenticity. We've got a really rich stack of material to get into.
Okay, let's jump right in then. This core idea. Memory is reconstructive, not a video recorder.
Absolutely. This is kind of the bedrock concept. When you access a memory, your brain isn't just like finding a file in a specific folder.
Right.
It's engaging in reconstruction. It's piecing together bits of information. And here's the really wild part.
Yeah.
The very act of recalling a memory can actually change it. One source puts it super simply. Using memory changes memory.
Wait, really? So just thinking about something from the past, reliving it in my head, that could subtly change the memory itself.
Potentially, yeah. Every time you retrieve it, it's a chance for a little tweak, a modification. Now, it helps to know the sources talk about different kinds of memory.
Okay.
There's episodic memory. That's your autobiography, basically. Specific events tied to a time and place, what you had for breakfast, your 10th birthday party. That's what we usually mean when we say we remember something.
Got it. My personal timeline.
Right. Then you have semantic memory. That's your general knowledge. Facts, like knowing Paris is the capital of France or what a dog is. It's knowledge, but not tied to a specific personal event.
Okay, facts versus experiences.
Yeah, and they rely on different brain networks. Plus, there's implicit learning or memory stuff you know how to do without consciously thinking about remembering, like riding a bike or typing. Learned skills.
And what about those people you hear about with, like, super memories? Can they still form false memories?
That's a great question. And yeah, the sources cover that. Even people identified as having highly superior autobiographical memory. These are the folks who can recall incredible detail about almost every day of their lives.
Yeah, amazing.
Even they have been shown in lab settings to be susceptible to forming false memories. It really seems like this reconstructive thing affects everyone, to some degree.
So, okay, if memory is this dynamic, easily influenced thing,
Yeah.
how do these distortions actually happen? Where do the seeds of falsehood come from?
Oh, there's so many factors, especially for complex or stressful events like witnessing a crime or an accident.
Right.
The sources list a bunch of things that make eyewitness memory, in particular, pretty unreliable, like how much stress you were under at the time, the lighting, how long you actually saw the person or event, whether you knew the person, if there was a weapon involved. That's called weapon focus. People tend to stare at the weapon and miss other details, like the person's face. And just, the simple amount of time that's passed since the event, that's a big one. Memory fades and changes over time.
And importantly, this isn't necessarily about someone lying, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Crucially, most of this distortion is unintentional. Memory can just sort of unintentionally integrate false information. It leads to what the researchers call inaccurate recollections.
Okay.
There's a famous lab experiment that shows this really well. It's called the Diess-Roediger-McDermott paradigm, or DRM for short.
DRM.
Yeah. So in a DRM study, you might hear a list of related words, say door, glass, pane, shade, ledge.
Okay, words related to window.
Exactly. But the word window itself isn't on the list. Later, when asked what words they heard, people are very, very likely to confidently say they remember hearing window.
Even though it wasn't there. Why?
Well, the sources explain it's because our brains are often processing the gist, the general theme or meaning, rather than every single specific detail. It's efficient for understanding, but
It can lead you to fill in blanks incorrectly.
precisely. You fill it in based on what should fit the theme. And then there's the whole issue of information you get after the event.
Right, I've heard about that. Like leading questions.
Absolutely. That's a huge field, the impact of misleading post-event information. Studies show how easily someone's memory can be altered by suggestions or information they get after the event, maybe during questioning, or even just hearing someone else's account. It just shows how vulnerable memory is.
And this isn't just an individual thing, is it? This malleability, it can actually shape how whole groups remember things.
That's right. It gets into what we call collective memory, the shared memories within a society or group, and how that connects to social identity.
Okay.
When you see large groups of people seemingly sharing a memory that doesn't quite line up with the historical record, sometimes people call that the Mandela Effect. It's sort of a popular term for this collective misremembering.
Like the example you mentioned, people thinking Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 80s.
That's the classic one, yeah. Mentioned in the sources, he was released, of course, became president, lived until 2013. Other common ones pop up too, like the Monopoly man supposedly having a monocle.
He doesn't. I thought he did.
See? Nope, never had one. Or famous movie lines getting misquoted. Lots of people swear Darth Vader says, "Luke, I am your father."
It's no, I am your father.
Yeah, exactly. No, I am your father. But the wrong version is stuck in the collective memory for many.
That's wild. How does something like that spread? Is there a mechanism?
Well, one mechanism the sources talk about is something called socially shared retrieval-induced forgetting, SSRIF.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
SSRIF.
Yeah. It happens when people talk about the past together. So say we both witnessed the same event and we're discussing it. When I retrieve and talk about certain details, that act of retrieving and mentioning them can actually make it harder for both of us to remember other related details that we didn't talk about. Seriously. So just by focusing on certain parts in our conversation, we're accidentally making other parts harder to recall. For both of us.
That's the idea. Even if our original memories weren't identical, talking about it together can kind of align our memories and create shared forgotten bits, the omitted details. Studies looking at how people recalled 911, for instance, showed this. Details discussed became stronger, unmentioned ones weaker for the group. It helps shape these shared, sometimes slightly off, collective memories.
Okay, so we've seen memory can get distorted unintentionally, but now let's get into something maybe even more mind-bending, deliberately planting memories.
Right. This is where the science really pushes the boundaries. Feels almost like science fiction, but it's grounded in actual research, especially work done with mice, which the sources detail. They show false memories can literally be created by the researchers.
Okay, tell me about that mouse experiment. It sounds fascinating. It really demonstrates how physically malleable memory can be. Researchers identified the specific brain cells, the memory enneagram, linked to a particular memory in a mouse, like being in a safe, comfortable cage, using optogenetics that's using light to control brain cells.
Right, I've heard of that.
They could reactivate that safe cage memory trace on demand.
Okay.
So while the mouse is basically remembering being in the safe cage, triggered by the light, the researchers gave it a mild foot shock. But, and this is key, the shock happened while the mouse was physically in a different neutral cage.
Okay. So feeling safe but getting shocked in a different place.
Exactly. What happened? The mouse developed a false fear memory. It started associating the safe cage, where it was never actually shocked, with the fear of the shock.
Right.
Because the researchers had artificially linked the safe cage neurons with the fear experience at the neural level, put it back in the original safe cage later, and it freezes in fear.
They literally engineered a false memory.
Essentially, yes. A false emotional association. Now, it's crucial, and the sources stress this, the jump from mice to humans is massive. Huge technical and ethical hurdles. We're nowhere near doing this in people, but
the principle is there. It shows memory can be manipulated biologically.
exactly. The potential is demonstrated, and you can immediately see the implications.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, maybe dampening traumatic memories for PTSD.
Yeah.
Enhancing positive ones.
Those are the potential therapeutic angles people speculate about. But as the sources rightly flag, the ethical side is, well, it's described as frightening. The power to intentionally plant or erase memories. That opens up enormous questions about control, autonomy, reality.
And speaking of huge implications, let's shift to where this hits the real world hard.
Yeah.
The justice system. Eyewitness testimony is, it's used all the time, right? Commonly used.
All the time. It's often incredibly compelling evidence in court.
But its reliability is clearly a massive issue because of everything we've just discussed about memory being fragile and reconstructive.
It's a critical, often tragic intersection of memory science and law. One huge problem the sources highlight is witness confidence.
How so?
Well, a witness's level of confidence can influence how credible their testimony is perceived. Juries, judges, they tend to believe someone who sounds really sure.
That makes intuitive sense, I guess.
It does, but here's the problem. That confidence does not automatically ensure correctness. Study after study shows that even highly confident witnesses can misidentify individuals.
So someone could be absolutely certain, point someone out, swear it was them, and still be completely wrong. That's terrifying.
It is. The sources call it an unfortunate misunderstanding, this belief that high confidence equals high accuracy. It's just not true. They state clearly. Confidently recalled recollections can sometimes be inaccurate, and real memories are not always highly confident and detailed. Sometimes fuzzy, uncertain memories are actually the accurate ones.
And the legal process itself, can that actually make things worse? Can it inflate that false confidence?
Oh, definitely. The litigation process itself subjects the memories of witnesses to powerful biases. Think about post-identification feedback.
What's that?
Imagine a witness picks someone from a lineup. If the police officer, even accidentally, gives some kind of confirming feedback like, "Good, you picked the guy we suspected,"
Okay.
that can massively boost the witness's confidence in their choice, even if they were hesitant before, and even if the choice was wrong. Plus, witnesses might have a stake in the outcome, loyalty, or just a subconscious desire to assist the side that called them. All subtle pressures.
So the system trying to get to the truth might actually be polluting the evidence along the way.
It's a real danger, and the Innocence Project's work, mentioned in the sources, drives this home. They use DNA evidence, right?
Yeah.
And they've exonerated hundreds of individuals, people wrongly convicted, often spending years in prison, and faulty eyewitness testimony is a leading factor in those wrongful convictions.
Are there specific cases in the sources that really illustrate these dangers?
Yes, several really troubling ones. The McMartin preschool and We Care nursery cases from the 80s and 90s, they involved interviewing young children repeatedly. But the questioning methods were found to be highly suggestive and coercive. This led to many false allegations of abuse that just weren't backed up by physical evidence. It was a very difficult, painful situation fueled by suggestive interviewing.
God, involving kids makes it even worse.
Absolutely. Then there's the case of Paul Ingram. He was a deputy sheriff accused of really horrific ritualistic abuse involving his own family.
Okay.
He had no memory of doing these things. But after intense, prolonged interrogations where investigators who believed he must have done it and was repressing it used techniques like visualization exercises and suggestion. He started generating flashbacks and images. He came to believe these images were real memories, confessed, and pled guilty, even though there was no physical evidence. He was essentially convinced by the interrogation process itself.
He constructed memories based on their suggestions.
That's what the sources suggest happened. And another case, Therese Franklin, involved recovered memory techniques in therapy, things like guided imagery, inner child work. These led her to develop memories of abuse, which resulted in a lawsuit.
But were they reliable?
Well, a judge eventually overturned the verdict. The ruling stated that those kinds of therapeutic techniques were inherently unreliable for recovering memories, drawing a comparison to how hypnosis had also been deemed unreliable for court purposes.
So it seems like there's often a big gap then between what science knows about memory and some naive beliefs still held in the legal world.
That's exactly what the sources point out. Legal professionals, police, judges, jurors sometimes operate on assumptions about memory that contradict scientific research, like the idea that a super detailed memory must be accurate.
Right. You'd think more detail means it's real.
But the research suggests the opposite can be true. Sometimes highly detailed accounts are fabricated. A truly accurate memory might be quite vague on certain details, so extreme detail should sometimes be a harbinger for skepticism, not confidence.
Are things changing? Are there efforts to fix this? To bring legal practices more in line with the science?
Yes, thankfully. There are positive steps. The sources mention things like the Eyewitness Evidence Guide for law enforcement. It provides recommended practices, how to conduct lineups, how to interview witnesses to minimize contamination, and try to get the most accurate information possible.
Oh, good.
And specifically for interviewing children, there's something called the NICHD protocol. It's an evidence-based method that's been shown to enhance the accuracy and quality of information by using much more open-ended questions and drastically cutting down on suggestive prompts.
That all seems crucial, which, brings us back to the more personal side. If memory is so tied to us, but so wobbly,
Yeah.
what does that actually mean for our sense of identity? Who are we if our foundation is like this?
Yeah, this is where it gets really deep and philosophical, doesn't it? We have this incredibly strong gut feeling, right? That our memory is our personal identity. It's integral. Our life story, our experiences. That's me.
It's hard to even imagine feeling like yourself if you lost all your memories, like in amnesia movies.
Totally. But the sources throw a wrench in that simple idea. They pose a philosophical challenge. Is memory really necessary for identity? Some research they cite looked at dementia patients,
Okay.
and it found that changes in the person's moral behavior, like if a previously kind person became cruel, had a greater impact on perceived identity by loved ones than memory loss alone.
So how you act defines you more than what you remember.
In the eyes of others, in that context, yes. It suggests identity, it might be more tied to our core moral characteristics and personality traits than just our autobiographical recall. It definitely complicates the memory-identity equation.
Interesting.
The sources also bring in the narrative approach to authenticity. This idea says that being authentic isn't just about discovering some pre-existing true self. It's about self-creation and self-discovery through the story we tell about our lives, our self-narrative.
So we build ourselves through our story.
Right, that narrative constitutes the self. But, and this is important, this approach suggests the narrative should ideally be grounded in facts about life events. There needs to be some underlying facticity, some connection to what actually happened.
So our authentic story needs a basis in reality, even if memory isn't perfect.
That's the tension. And this is where the idea of extensive memory deletion or editing becomes really problematic for this view. If you lost huge chunks of your past, especially key formative memories, it could really damage that narrative authenticity. It reduces your self-knowledge. It makes the story less coherent. Your self becomes less well-defined, like the example given. If you forget being bullied as a child, maybe your strong commitment to anti-bullying work later in life suddenly lacks its personal grounding. The why is gone. The coherence suffers.
And thinking about future tech, memory manipulation technology, that really messes with this narrative idea, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If we gain direct and intentional control over our forgetting, or if we can actually edit the factual content of our memories, is the resulting self-narrative still authentic? Is the you based on that edited history still genuinely you? Huge question.
There's even an old philosophical angle on memory and responsibility.
Yeah, briefly mentioned John Locke's idea way back when. He basically argued identity relies on consciousness and memory. So, provocatively, if you genuinely don't remember committing a crime, are you the same person who did it? Are you still culpable?
Wow, that's a heavy thought.
It is. And of course, there are counter-arguments that responsibility might lie with the choices or actions that maybe led to the memory loss, not just the state of remembering itself. But it just underscores how deep these connections run. Memory, identity, ethics, responsibility.
Which brings us right back to the ethics of actually doing this. Manipulating memory.
Yeah, the sources are clear that this needs serious thought. A dedicated, tailored ethics framework. When researchers actually ask people what they thought about planting false memories, even for potentially good reasons, like helping someone quit smoking.
What do people say?
A lot of concern. People felt it was overly manipulative, potentially harmful or traumatic. Many felt the ends do not justify the means, big fears about the potential for abuse, and the fundamental issue of lack of consent. Who gets to decide which memories get changed?
So even for a good outcome, the method itself feels wrong to many people.
Deeply problematic, yeah. And the sources contrast this technological manipulation idea with other ways of dealing with difficult past, particularly trauma.
Like therapy.
Like approaches involving vulnerable communication facilitated by radical honesty and loving perception. Basically, talking it through honestly with empathetic listeners, using dialogue, communicative reason to reach a shared understanding and integrate the trauma into your life story.
So processing and making sense of it rather than just deleting it?
Exactly. It's presented as a more authentic way to handle trauma facing it, understanding it, integrating it with support, rather than trying to technologically erase or alter the past itself. A very different ethical approach.
Okay, so given all this complexity, memories, power, its flaws, the ethical minefields, what can we actually do? Any practical takeaways from the sources for navigating this in our own lives?
Yeah, there are a few helpful things. First, maybe the simplest but most important, just acknowledge its chameleon-like nature. Accept that your memory isn't perfect. Just knowing that.
Just being aware.
Right. That awareness can make discussions about the past less conflict-ridden. If you disagree with someone's recollection, maybe it's not that they're lying. Maybe it's just memory's fallibility at play for both of you.
That's a good point. Humility about our own recall.
Exactly. Second, they suggest documenting your life. Keeping a journal, taking photos, videos. These create external records that can help anchor your memories and check details later.
Okay. Create some external truth checks.
Yeah. Third, maybe keep a basic timeline of major life events. It sounds simple, but even the order of big things can get muddled over time. Having a rough timeline can help keep the basic structure straight.
Makes sense. What about sharing memories?
Reliving memories with others who were also there can definitely be helpful. Talking about shared experiences can jog details for everyone, and studies show reminiscing together can actually boost happiness and connection.
That's nice.
But remember that SSRIF thing we talked about?
Ah, the socially shared forgetting.
Right. So while talking reinforces the details you do discuss, it can also inadvertently suppress the details you don't mention for everyone involved. So sharing is good, but be mindful it also shapes the shared memory.
It's never simple, is it?
Rarely.
Yeah.
It really underscores how dynamic memory is, even when shared. And, researchers are also looking into the adaptive value of forgetting. Maybe forgetting isn't always a bug. Maybe sometimes it's a feature helping us prioritize information or move past negative experiences.
And that reconsolidation idea, where memories become unstable when recalled. How does that fit in?
Right, memory reconsolidation. That's the window where a memory, once activated, can potentially be updated before it's stored again. The sources mention that to really change a memory during this window, you often need something new.
New information.
Yeah, or a new experience that creates a prediction error, something that clashes with the old memory, or provides a new meaning that contradicts habitual and negative predictive schemas. Basically, something needs to challenge the old narrative strongly enough for the brain to say, okay, time to update this.
So you need a reason to rewrite the story, essentially.
That's a good way to put it. It's another angle researchers are using to understand how memories aren't static, how they might naturally change or potentially be guided towards change.
Wow. Well, this has been quite a journey through our own minds, hasn't it? A real deep dive. We started seeing memory as this incredible human faculty. It lets us learn from the past, imagine the future. It defines so much of our personal story.
Absolutely fundamental, distinguishing between just knowing facts and truly remembering personal experiences.
But then we saw just how surprisingly fragile it is,
Right.
how easily influenced, how reconstructive it is.
Yeah.
And the consequences are massive in courtrooms and therapy, potentially with future technologies.
Yeah, the realization that high confidence doesn't equal accuracy, that suggestions can literally become memories, that even talking about the past shapes what we collectively remember and forget. It's pretty staggering.
It really is. And all of this, everything we've pulled from the sources today, it leads to a pretty profound final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Yeah, think about this. If memory isn't a stable recording, but more like this ongoing story we tell ourselves, a story constantly being edited by time, by new information, by our current moods, even by conversations.
And if our very identity, our sense of who we are, is built on this constantly shifting foundation.
Then what does that really mean for objective truth about our own past? And maybe even more fundamentally, what does it mean for the very definition of you? How can we ever be sure what truly happened, or ultimately who we really are, when the ground beneath our feet is so fluid?